Well, I was a compositor in the printing trade, learning my trade, and it was a bit boring for me. And I saw an ad in Sydney Morning Herald say, join K-Force to go to Korea. I had no idea where Korea was, never heard of it before, and I decided to fill out the papers, and I was 19 years of age then.
What happened to me was I was a serving member of the Royal Australian Navy, and one of the sailors off the ship I went to, which was HMAS Kalgoa, said, "Hey, we're going to Korea." He said, "When you come back on Monday."
I'd arrived in Sydney from North Queensland, and it was just difficult settling in, finding a job. But we decided that we'd go to the recruiting office, and what happened that night, they put you in tents and they had a shower and cleaned up and had really good meals. So the next day I decided to join the army and put my age up to 22, and so I didn't have to get my parents' consent.
You wonder about life. Had that newspaper not been on the table, open at that page, I had been working in a job studying electrical engineering, and I didn't see myself going anywhere, and I got bored with the study. And the Korean War had broken out in 1950, and I was looking at the newspaper and it said, join the Air Force and learn to fly.
I was in the Royal Australian Navy. I wanted to go to sea. It's not that I wanted to fire guns and sink ships. I just loved the whole ambience of the sea. We had a very concentrated training, and when we finished that, after 6 months, we went to serve with the Royal Navy. And the Korean War broke out, so we were quickly assigned to the Far East Fleet. The Brits cobbled together a brigade from the Hong Kong garrison. The Argylls were placed on board our ship, and we sailed from Hong Kong to go to Korea.
I was getting bombed day and night in Liverpool during the Blitz. There was 4,000 people killed. And I thought, well, if another war started, I'd like to have a bash. So I came out to Australia in 1949. The Korean War started in 1950, and I volunteered in 1951 to join the Navy.
Well, first impression, we landed in Korea about the middle of March, and when we got to Korea, all we saw was just military trucks everywhere and camouflage, and a lot of Koreans very poor, and one thing that struck me was a Korean lady getting out of a cardboard box. That was her home. I just knew that I was doing a job and I had to do it, and we had what they call catcoms, and they were Koreans trained with us, and I got on real well with the South Korean soldiers. 17,000 personnel served in Korea from Australia. 19 months I was in the army, 19. I was only a private. My contract was 24 months.
We went there for about 12 months up till the ceasefire, backwards and forwards all the time. I was in my 20s, yeah. My service rank at the time was leading seaman, underwater weapons.
We landed in Busan, and that was devastating. That was flattened, and I remember standing on the back of a truck, and you could look over the whole of Busan City on the truck. It was just flat. So they took us up to the front. I remember when the shelling started and it got heavy, and I thought, well, no one asked me to come here, I volunteered. Just do my best and see what happens.
So we arrived in Busan, disembarked the Argylls. It was very formidable because the people had been pushed into this Busan perimeter, which had a radius of about 20 miles.
And then I was drafted to the Light Fleet aircraft carrier, HMAS Sydney. It had about 1,500 men and about 3 squadrons of airplanes.
We arrived in, I think it was the beginning of February of 1953. The place was very bleak, it had been through a lot. And then we were escorted to our accommodation, 6 to a tent. And in the middle of the winter in Korea, a tent is not a very friendly and homely place.
The destroyers used to go close inshore and bombard the east and west coast, but the planes used to do the sorties and go over to North Korea. and then we'd go to the 38th parallel on the east and west coast, and then we'd be up there for 3 weeks. Then we'd come back. At that stage, the Chinese came into the war too.
I was there in the front line 3.5 weeks, where I did about 10 patrols in no man's land. The Chinese were on the other side of the hill, and we were on this side of the south side of the hill. Nobody did patrols during the day because the enemy could see you, but every night we used to do patrols where we'd just go down and sit in the valley and listen, and some of them were fighting patrols to try and capture a Chinese enemy, but you were high-strung and nervous and everything, and you know, you had to expect what anything happened, everything. On the 28th of May, the Chinese would look like they're going to put an attack in and try and take the whole front line. In the middle of the night, they said a patrol had been missing. Maury Sharp, my mate, we got on so well together. Maury says, I'm going down the minefield to look for Jack Ash. And me and my squeaky voice, can I come with you? As we're walking along, I saw a box lid on the ground which says danger mines. I said to Maury, we're okay, there's a minefield down there. But we didn't realise that we were already in the minefield looking at the outside fence. One of us tripped the landmine up and the landmine exploded. We were both thrown to the ground, wounded, and I was in the hospital for a month. I was lucky, you know, I didn't lose arms or legs or anything, and they're lucky I didn't get hit in the head too.
I served on HMAS Kalgawa in Korea, around the Korean coast. My action station was on the depth charges, or the head-thrown weapon. We were more or less listening for submarines because they thought the Chinese would bring submarines down there to kill off all the shipping, but they never suspected any. They never got contact with any. Not only did we go there, but the Canadians, the New Zealanders, everybody backed up and went there and helped South Korea, which didn't have much of a navy. That's why mostly navy came from other countries. The navy, I'm talking about the navy as a whole, they always have some of our ships up there. We slept in hammocks. There was no bunks or anything on board.
Taejongdo was a base where we used to liaise with Republic of Korea guerrillas. We would foray out from there if we were going to do a bombardment. And indeed we had been doing some operations there when we noticed an accumulation of ships. And our captain told us that in a few days' time the Americans would be landing at Incheon. My involvement there, my action station was a gunnery control position, and I had control of all the anti-aircraft guns on the starboard side of the ship. It was a bit alarming at first. You could see the landing craft going in, aircraft flying towards them, firing, some explosions, and we thought the North Korean Air Force was attacking them. What they were doing, there was aircraft could see mines in the water, and they were shooting at the mines to detonate them before the landing craft got there. Our main operation was to patrol up the Gulf in case the Chinese were running supplies across the sea to reinforce the North Korean forces. But then, after the landing at Incheon, the North Koreans withdrew very rapidly. We had bombarded Port Gyeongdo on the northeast coast of North Korea. And this inspired the Chinese to see a threat, and they entered the war. There was a huge withdrawal of American forces and British forces from North Korea. And quite a large force of civilians were evacuated from Nampon. That winter was the coldest winter of the century, the winter of 1950-51.
The worst part, of course, was when we were on dawn patrol, which meant that you had to get up at about 4 o'clock in the morning and down to your aeroplane by about 5:30 or 6 o'clock. The idea was to go into North Korea to try and catch transport before they made it to safety. That was our job, was to keep the transport off the road. We also were given targets, important strategic targets. The Meteor was a very heavily armed aeroplane, and so we could do a lot of damage. It was a short-range aeroplane, so at the end of about an hour, if you weren't close to home, you were in a bit of trouble. So we had to watch our fuel very carefully. We were doing dives into deep valleys and then pulling out with maximum power on to get out. That caught a few people out. I was coming back from a mission one day and I was following a chap, and next thing he disappeared. I thought, where on earth's he gone? He'd run out of fuel on final approach and just dropped out of the sky. Fortunately, he survived, and I don't think the aeroplane was much good after that, but he was. I think in the long term there was about 42 killed in 3 years and 7 or 9 taken prisoner of war.
It was a fight to the death as far as South Korea was concerned. And of course the talks were on, peace talks were in Panmunjom. So both the enemy, the Chinese and North Koreans, and the people in the south were all fighting for territory, because they knew at some point those peace talks must end, and that territory that you got then is probably the territory you're going to have. When they had the Battle of the Samachon, the Hook on the Samachon River, rather than hand-to-hand fighting, which happened, was in the trenches, it was the artillery that devastated the enemy. And a lot of young Chinese, because we met them the day after, we went and talked to them. I got photographs there. Well, there's 2,000 died, but they were predominantly under 20.
We went into Incheon and we went and had a look at Seoul. Well, a lot of bombed out buildings.
There was one occasion when an American guy in a Jeep said, I'm going into Seoul, do you want to come for a ride? So we drove into Seoul, and it was, of course, it had been devastated.
The two things that stand out to me is devastation, there was no greenery, and wherever you went there were refugees. There were kids everywhere, and lots of homeless people. The Korean summer is very hot, and I can remember walking on the grass. It was so hot, it would crackle, but you know, not that unpleasant. We all knew about the Korean winter. To go to bed at night, you just took off the parka, but you slept in your clothes. You took your boots off, and you put your boots in bed with you, keep them warm, because otherwise they froze.
Oh yeah, it was cold. You could go on deck and it was pretty cold there, but we all stayed below because it was very warm there, but it was the only time I saw salt water freeze.
And we lived on what they call sea rations, our food, and we'd try and get to a restaurant or something. If there was one on the roadside, we'd just stop and just have some local food. That's why I remember my first kimchi was there. For me then, as a North Queenslander, it was very spicy.
They say Korea was the forgotten war. It wasn't forgotten because in order to forget something, you have to know something. And people just didn't know about it.
See, the war went on for 3 years and 1 month, you know, it was 25th of June 1950 to 27th of July 53, when the truce was signed. And it's only a truce, I mean, after all these years, just only a truce.
You wouldn't think, like when you saw the devastation there, that they come out of the mire and do so well. I got a letter in the post to say there's a trip going back to Korea and we'd like to join us, so I was in there straight away, yeah. But they really loved us and they saluted, they would stop, you know, and soldiers or other people come in and say, you know, thank you for your service, and you wonder what you really did, but they appreciate it.
It's very rewarding to see what has grown out of the Korean War. Australia had a pretty strong representation amongst the countries in the United Nations Command.
And they have made giant steps forward. It's successful in as much as they are now, have been free for all this time.
I had the honour of returning to Korea with the group, and it had a really profound effect upon me. South Korea had been turned into a garden, because when I remember it, the mountains had no trees. It was just browns, and now it's just colour everywhere.
I can't see Korea becoming a united nation, unfortunately. The North Korean people are so different now to the South Korean people, and it's not their fault, of course. It's the regime under which they've been living. The worry is that, okay, we've done our job, but as we look at the world today to turn around and perhaps become a problem again, and in this case a larger problem because we're starting to talk nuclear.
Things that worry me, the climate change is going to create a series of situations, I believe, that countries that are democratic, really have to work much closer together for each other's interest, and especially with South Korea. We need to be, we can look after each other a lot more.